Thanks
and
for the
to
invitation.
Manhattan Neighborhood Network and to Public Access. And in the audience, welcome very much to Conversation. Our guest is Glen Glen Ford, I'm sorry. Glen Ford, he's executive editor, executive producer of a thing called Black Agenda Report. Very interesting, he's got a long experience in media and talking about issues of the human condition. Looking forward to talking to him, and Glen, welcome very much to Conversation.
Thanks for allowing me to come here and talk to you.
My great good pleasure you could make it on this beautiful spring day. Could you share your background, please? Born and raised, a little bit educated, and then we'll talk about the Black Agenda and then other matters.
Well, I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, right across the river. My mother and father were very political people. My father was also the first black man to have a television show in the Deep South.
Good for him.
In Columbus, Georgia, in 1958.
Wow.
I spent most of my youth going back and forth between Columbus, Georgia, and Jersey City. When I turned 17, I went into the U.S. military. That was in 1967, and when I got out of the 82nd Airborne Division of the U.S. Army, I went to work for James Brown's radio station in Augusta, Georgia in 1970.
You were airborne?
Yes.
Were you gung-ho?
No, I wasn't gung-ho. Well, no more so or less so than the rest of them.
And what year?
67 through 70.
67, yeah, okay, that was Vietnam.
It was during that period, and I missed that bullet many times. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, yeah. You jumped out of airplanes.
That's what paratroopers do. Yes.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they wanted me to go to Ranger School or something. I was one of the worst soldiers in the history of the United States Army, I think, you know, because all I wanted to do from the day I got in was get out. You know, I didn't like it, but it's all kinds. Anyway, it was that. And then your dad started this, what was it? It was television in '57. That was really early.
He started in radio in Newark, New Jersey at WNJR. Which was then a black-oriented station, although populated mostly with white disc jockeys.
Interesting.
And then returned to the South in '58 to work on radio and took advantage of a television opportunity.
And he was political.
Oh, yeah.
And the family was political.
Of course.
Okay. And it's interesting.
But you know, back, we're talking about segregation time.
Absolutely horrible.
Even becoming the first black to have a television show was political.
Absolutely.
Whether one wanted it to be or not.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. That was something. That was before the. That was before, what was it, '62 or so? It got going with the Freedom Riders and that kind of stuff. And he was living down there. You were in Jersey or what? I don't understand. He was down in Georgia, right? But that was not New Jersey. Was he?
He returned to Georgia after living in New Jersey for decades in 1957.
I see. And did you live in Georgia for a while then with him?
I lived in Georgia and Jersey, alternating.
Because you were more or less adult by then and everything.
No, I was 8 years old in 1958.
Okay. But the family was political, and it was a political time coming up, and you had the Freedom Riders going down there, I don't know, '62 or so, and you had the Bull Connor and all that stuff. It was all that stuff was going on in the South, and he was covering that as
no, he was a disc jockey, and there was very little news on black-oriented stations at that time. In fact, there were few black-oriented stations.
Right.
The explosion of black-oriented radio occurred with the rise of the Black Freedom Movement, which created or set loose a demand among black people for radio that sounded like they did.
Yeah, right.
And so from the mid to the late '60s, we saw an explosion of black programmed stations, not black owned necessarily, but black programmed. And then that was followed, logically, by an explosion in black radio news, which I became part of upon leaving the Army in 1970.
I see, okay.
Black radio news was still rather young. A young profession. We were making it up as we went along.
Sometimes it's fun that way. You got a lot of youthful energy. And
no one could tell you what you were supposed to do because it had not been done.
Right. There's some advantage to that. That definitely is. I heard you say something on that radio that broadcast facility, your dad, there were a lot of white people rather than black, even though it was oriented toward black.
That's right.
That's like Pat Boone singing a good blues song or something. A lot of that.
Just as in music,
yeah.
that whites fronting as blacks
yeah.
was also dominant in black radio as well.
Right, right. The real good stuff came from the one American art form, it seems to me, is jazz. And a lot of things, where that came from, all that came from up from the Delta and that kind of thing. I had a friend, John Sinclair.
Well, that's why the United States is not Canada.
Right. Good thought, I guess. I guess that's a good thought. I knew John Sinclair real well. He ended up down in New Orleans for a while. He's over in Paris now, but he was doing stuff with that. And anyway, that was the time. And so you were political, and also 1970 was a hell of a time. There was a rend in the society along about then. There was Malcolm, there was Martin King, there were all these things going on, or they had been, and then also the Vietnam thing was raging. Did you get involved in the anti-Vietnam stuff after you get out of the service, or in the service, or what were you feeling when you were in the service during the time of the Vietnam incursion?
Well, I became part of the Panther Party.
You did, okay.
But let me tell you about,
yes, please.
about the James Brown experience, because
okay.
that was my first full-time radio gig, and also my first full-time news gig. And I wasn't very happy to be doing news. I'd been in the Army for 3 years and felt myself deprived of women and money.
Yep.
Having given them my 3 teenage years.
Yes.
And so, like most guys getting out of the Army, I wanted access to more women and money. And that was not in news. But I knew that it was in the music end, in disc jockeying, because that's what my father had been. But they preferred that I do news. And so I'm in Augusta, Georgia, wondering how one runs this news thing. Remember, it was still a very young
This is 1970.
1970.
All right.
I got there before light in the morning, late in January. It was very cold. And the news director explained to me, there's your recording equipment. Over there is your teletype machine. And your name is Ford. My name is not Ford, it's Rutherford, but he said, your name is Ford. And I said, okay, boss, because I needed that gig. And then he pointed to a piece of paper on the wall. And he said, and that's a list of the big black folks in town. And any time something comes across the wire that needs a reaction, go to that list and see what they have to say. I said, okay. He left the room. I went to the wall to look and see who was on that piece of paper. And to my shock and disgust, it was filled with Reverend this, and the Right Reverend that, Bishop this. It was all preachers. And I said, this is a damn theocracy. I'm not going to continue the theocracy in terms of black leadership. So I tore the list down. And I spent the next week
putting your own list together.
Yes, immersing myself in Black Augusta. The first thing I did was to go into the housing projects, because I knew that in the housing project there was this large, loud black woman who always was complaining about the conditions.
Well, good for her,
in public housing. And there she was. Of course she was there. She's always there. And so I met her and all of the other, mostly female tenants who were part of her group. And she became my expert on housing.
Okay, good.
Now, I also knew that I would certainly find the black entrepreneur who was always complaining that the city and the county never gave blacks any contracts. And sure enough, he was there. Just as I knew he would be. So I found him, and he became my contact person on black economic development.
Very good.
And I also knew that there was always a brother who would jump up every time another brother got beaten or shot down by the
With
police.
alarming regularity,
That's
I'm here
right.
to say, yeah.
I knew he was there, and I found him.
Yeah.
And he became my contact person on criminal justice, and so on until, and it took about a week or two.
Yeah.
I had 10 people who I informally called the Committee of 10.
Okay, good.
And every time some new, oh, I must add, Augusta didn't even have, even though it was majority black, it was still a backwater. And so there was not even one black city councilman in Augusta.
Right.
Now, so every time something came across the wire, every time the white city council did anything, every time anything happened in the greater Augusta area, I had someone to speak to.
Yeah.
So these people were on the air in every newscast. And sure enough, after about 2 weeks of this, these people whom I'd selected became the black leadership of Augusta, Georgia.
There you go. The media
because
has power. Huh?
They must be the leaders because they're on the radio.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And it hit me. It was my eureka moment.
Yeah,
Remember,
right.
I'm ad-libbing. I'm trying to figure out how do I do this news thing and empower people.
Right.
And it hit me. I said, wow, you can really change the political complexion of a city if you have control of that mic. And after that, I was hooked.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go back and do and be like my father, even though
that's where the money was, you said?
That's where the money was, and that's where the women were. But the political change was in news.
And you were political.
That's right. And so that's when I felt secure and confident and hopeful about being in that profession, even though after tax, James Brown only paid me $52 a week.
Okay, well, you had a calling, then, that sort of thing, and did you develop a good listenership and so forth? Did they start tuning in and start having a real effect on things? Apparently
the reason that we could so quickly change the political complexion of the leadership in Black Augusta was because there was only one black radio station. And so everybody in Black Augusta was listening to WRDW.
And they were the majority of the population.
And they were the majority of the population.
Not a single member on the council.
However, as I said, they were a political backwater. And why were they a political backwater? The black leadership was not allowed to develop. Remember, when I came in, the piece of paper on the wall was full of reverends and bishops.
Well, what about that? Reverend Martin Luther King was a major force. He was marching at Selma and that kind of thing, or had been. And there are people coming. There are a lot of those people. Reverend Jesse Jackson and so forth. I don't even know, But you don't think that? Who were your people that you were inspired by?
It is a myth.
Okay.
That the black church was some bastion of progressivism, of activism, of liberationism in the South. It is absolutely not true.
Really?
What Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference ministers had to do was buck the black church.
What? Really? Okay, that's very interesting.
They were a minority and seen by the old guard as a rogue element in confronting the status quo. When you look at Dr. King's itinerary, his political itinerary, you see him going to out-of-the-way places like St. Augustine, Florida,
Selma,
like Albany, Georgia, instead of the big population centers. This is after Montgomery, and until Birmingham, because in most cities, the other black preachers would not invite him in. Understand that he was a Baptist preacher, and the protocol is that you don't enter a city unless at least one minister of one congregation opens his doors to you.
To his church, so you could have a pulpit.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So in the logical places, and I know for a fact that Columbus, Georgia, the second largest city in Georgia, was supposed to be the next, that is the SCLC folk, wanted Columbus, Georgia to be the next focus of operation. But even with 100 black churches, not one would open their doors
Now, why would
to
that
Dr.
be?
King, and that was
Okay.
replicated in Macon, Georgia,
Really?
and virtually every other large city. So this is why we find Dr. King going to out of the way places like St. Augustine, because he got an invitation.
So he was
Albany,
against
Georgia.
the grain of the standing of the reverends because they had an interest in the
because
local
they were
power structure.
because they were collaborators.
They were collaborators, and maybe they couldn't have even got their pulpit ever if they hadn't been a collaborator with an apartheid system.
Well, they got whatever benefits collaborators get.
Yeah.
And Dr. King and these rogue ministers,
Yeah.
as they were considered, threatened to upset that equilibrium.
Well, there was a lot.
And
yeah.
so the general ministry was absolutely hostile to Dr. King in the early years.
I didn't realize that. I think of Grenville or Granville or something in Mississippi and everything. I didn't realize that. Okay, so he was running against
as
the
the
tide.
movement gains momentum,
Yeah.
then of course openness among the clergy becomes broader.
Yeah.
But in those early years, no.
Oh boy, that's really something. Did you know?
And this is why we had to go around that list on the radio station wall
Well, that's really- I heard it here first. I didn't know.
in order for the authentic, legitimate leadership of Black Augusta, which I didn't create. I discovered them.
Yeah.
You dig? I mean, it was
Yeah.
discovery to me.
Yeah, right. No, I understand. Yeah.
And then gave them the exposure.
a mic.
That's right. Access.
You give a mic to the micless.
That's right, and access to the general population, because all of Black Augusta listened to that radio station.
But it was in the air, was it not? It was in the air, and you were living in that the country and everything. Racism is the biggest thing. Gardner Myrdal said that's a major problem, still is. Racism in the world is a terrible thing and everything, but you were in a situation where it was blowing in the wind, that you had an apartheid system. And that had been held for hundreds of years or something. So people have a hard time making that breakthrough. We think of what's her name who got on the bus or didn't sit down, and people who did things. And the early people who went to Woolworths and sat in and got pummeled, and some of them came down from the north and all that. It's hard to get a movement going when you've got all these institutions in place and relationships between them and prejudice and everything directed. It's hard to get something going, isn't it?
Well, let's talk about Montgomery.
Okay.
The NAACP in Montgomery, and remember, there had been other bus boycotts.
Okay.
That was not the first one. And in fact, there had been public transportation boycotts in generations past.
Really?
In the South. Oh, sure.
Oh, really?
But the NAACP...
How did the white establishment deal with those things in the past? Did they just lock
There was
them
a
up,
reign
throw
of
away
terror.
the key? Yeah.
A reign of terror.
So
in
it's
the South.
hard to do something
It's
when
hard
there's a
to do
reign of
something
terror.
if you will be murdered if you do it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that
Yes.
was what segregation was about in the South. It was white terror.
Yeah, right.
So the NAACP in Montgomery wanted to be very cautious about any action on regarding public transportation, and their plan was to demand only that the bus fill up from the front and the back. That is, blacks would, in this new regime, would still go to the back of the bus, but as the back filled up, blacks would be able to occupy seats closer and closer and closer to the front. Under the old regime,
even into the white territory?
Into what had been the white territory. The old regime had white territory.
Right, okay,
so,
and that was
so that blacks would have to stand up in the back even though there were seats in the front.
Gotcha.
So the NAACP thought that they would not demand but request that you just take the little sign that said white only and keep on filling up from the back to the front. But once the movement of people was in motion, once people were sacrificing by or walking to work or carpooling, and that is, the community became energized and mobilized, the people themselves said, I'm not walking to work and risking my job because my employer knows I'm walking to work and that I'm down with. I'm not doing all that just to keep on going to the back of the bus. That's not enough. So you see, leadership or misleadership plays a huge role in what can be accomplished. And as long as Augusta, Georgia had that theocratic collaborationist leadership, it wouldn't matter what was in the air, as you say, freedom in the air, if there's no leadership that can effectively mobilize people. If there is, in fact, a leadership that is effectively demobilizing the people, then you're still going to remain a backwater.
That's really interesting. Okay, yeah, that's really something. But there have been things going on. There have been things going over in Little Rock. There are things going on in Martin King and those kind of things.
Things don't happen magically.
No, I know. It's hard to get something going like that. But it seems to me a lot of... Okay, did you know Stokely? Or did you deal with Stokely
I
Carmichael?
met Stokely, but I did not know him. That is, he was not an acquaintance of mine.
He had a different kind of idea with the Black Power thing. It upset a lot of people. Things got a little bit hotter, a little bit more demanding, and that kind of thing.
Well, as you,
was a good
it's
friend
like
of mine.
think about as you move on an ocean, the further you move, your horizon moves as well.
Yeah, that's true.
The horizon doesn't just stay there.
Yeah.
It moves as you move.
Yeah, okay.
And if you keep moving forward, you finally see things that you couldn't see when you were back there.
Yeah, right.
So the more demands that the movement made, the more it learned, the more successes it accumulated, the horizon changed, and one could see even newer possibilities.
Yeah.
So of course the range of demands would expand, because we're moving forward and we're seeing different horizons.
Yeah, right.
And Black Power was beyond our horizon in 1960. But by 1965 and 66, that was what was on the horizon. It was quite logical. But nothing is just in the air.
Nothing is automatic. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of
any more than your car can go forward without gas.
Oh, right, yeah.
And will go in the right place without leadership.
How long were you in Augusta?
Oh, I was only there a few months.
A few months.
But that was long enough to ignite the movement.
Good for you. Were you a Panther then?
No, I was a Panther after I left and went back to Jersey City.
Okay, yeah, okay. You came back there after there. You started a...
Yeah, because we came to a parting of the ways with James Brown. The first project that the Committee of 10 wanted to tackle was to boycott the downtown business area. As I said, Augusta, Georgia was a backwater. Black folks, of course, were the main source of revenue for the downtown merchants, but very few black people could work there, and certainly not behind the counter. It was a classic case. It was the same kind of situation that Adam Clayton Powell was leading demonstrations against in the late 30s and the 40s. But this situation still obtained in Augusta, Georgia in 1970. So it was logical for the Committee of 10 to propose that be their first big project. It became a project because they were on the radio.
Okay, right.
So
you were putting them there.
That's right.
Good for you.
Excuse me.
No problem.
And so they set the date, and we made sure that there was news of the organizing activities moving forward towards the boycott, and the drawing up of demands and such, all the things that go into making a movement. And the countdown, it's 20 days to the boycott, 10 days.
And you were putting that out on the radio?
All of it was on the radio. And it became just a groundswell. It was a city come alive.
Yeah.
And by this time, I'm only there 5 or 6 weeks, and yet we have
a groundswell.
A groundswell. It was so exciting. So much so that the SCLC, headquartered in Atlanta, about 150 miles up the road, they decided they wanted to become part of it. And they sent some field organizers, which brought some national media. So Augusta was becoming a focal point.
I would have thought, right, good. Now, if I may, how come you're only there for a few months? Why didn't you stay there longer and make some more trouble?
I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
Well, I was wondering why Mr. Brown, and we all had to call him Mr. Brown. In fact, all the employees had to call each other Mr. or Ms. On pain of being fired.
Really?
And we had to wear suits and ties, even though I was only making $52
Now, wait a minute. Who are you
week.
working for?
James Brown.
Yeah, not the James Brown.
Yes, the James Brown.
Not the singer.
Of course, the singer.
The singer
Godfather.
is bigger than life. He owned the station?
He owned 3 stations at that time.
Okay, I hadn't gotten that earlier. Okay, well...
Now, Mr. Brown had not taken any position, and I always thought that
He
he
wasn't
was
taking political position at all?
on the
Boycott.
On the boycott movement. Yeah. And that worried me because, well, the downtown merchants that we were proposing, or that the movement was proposing to boycott, they were the staple of advertisers for the radio station. But Brown said nothing. The night before the boycott was to begin, the SCLC sent its best speakers in, and there was a mass meeting at the biggest black church. By this time, I had allowed the more progressive preachers to get their names back on the list, you know, the list of people to contact.
And they were more likely to do it. You'd made a breach in the wall.
That's right. And so we let the progressive preachers get back on the list. Not all of them. So the biggest church in the town, big mass meeting, 5,000 people, overflow.
That's a lot.
And this is the eve of the action. And halfway into the meeting, we get word that James Brown is coming in.
Yeah.
And he's donating $1,000 to the bail fund. All right. And people just stood up and cheered because James Brown, of course, is the by far most famous son of Augusta.
Yeah, right. Or of the South, maybe, or of the country,
right.
Maybe in many people's mind. Yeah.
But it appeared that Mr. Brown was with us. That morning, I came in to start my 6 o'clock shift. It was going to be a great day. This is the day the boycott begins. And there is a note on my microphone that says there will be no news broadcast on this station about the boycott.
Wow.
That is, Mr. Brown had come in order to destroy it.
I'll
you see. So
why?
That was because the station's revenues came from advertising by the same downtown merchants that had been discriminating against blacks in employment and who were the targets of the boycott.
That's a metaphor for the national economy as well, maybe?
I suppose you could take that lesson
to the bank. To the other than the bank.
You can apply it. You can apply it to society as a whole.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I saw that, and it was clear that I could not work for this man.
So what happened to the thing that was going to happen that very day?
I went and told the general manager, you know, I'm resigning. I'm not going to go on the air and pretend that nothing has happened. Just broadcast all the news except the news.
And you could right. All the news that ain't going to be heard.
So that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And he said, well, just wait a minute. Mr. Brown's going to be in half an hour, and y'all should talk.
So did you
he came in. And we talked civilly for about 10 minutes, and until he went off on me.
On a tangent?
I don't know, some kind
rampage?
Some kind of rant about you young people down here. He thought I was just from Georgia.
Yeah.
You young people down here, you don't know what life is like. I just came from Harlem. He had just done a record-setting appearance at the Apollo Theater.
Yeah, right.
But I saw young kids shooting that dope. You don't understand, you know. And it was clear but I was very upset because I realized that he was calling me country. And I said, James Brown calling me country.
Yeah, right. Oh, God, it'd be good to have some tape of that. You haven't got any tape or anything, right?
No, of
you
course
got any tape of the old record? Did you record the things that you were, the radio?
It was always just
in the wind. It should have all
wind.
Been recorded, brother. You could have had a tape recorder going for posterity.
So I cursed James Brown out, and we got...
You did it in that meeting?
Yeah.
To his face?
Of course. I couldn't help myself.
Did you get into a rant? Did you get
into
a
the station manager grabbed me, and the program director grab Mr. Brown, so I didn't get my butt whipped, because he could have. He could have. I mean, he was a great boxer.
He's bigger than you.
He was bigger than me, but also
Physically,
very in very good shape. James Brown was an athlete.
Yes. Okay.
But anyway, I got my severance check right there, and that's when I went back to Jersey.
You came back to Jersey, right? And then you got into were you conscious of Percy Sutton at all? Have you been in touch with Percy Sutton over your long career?
Well,
and his doing intercity broadcasting and other things?
Well, sure. Now,
yeah.
you know, but that's an interesting situation.
I mean, he was up from Texas. Yeah.
That station, WBLS,
yeah.
When it was white-owned, it was owned by a fellow named Katz.
Okay.
It was already by far the most, it was phenomenally popular station here, and it did news. By that time, every black radio station had to have a news department.
Yeah.
Even in small cities like Sparta, Georgia, they would have one full-time newsman, and that was a huge development. That in the space of just a couple of years, the black community went from having only a few, only small newspapers, to a whole cadre of black reporters, most of them very young.
I was going to ask you that. Was there a connection to your radio thing in Augusta with the newspaper, or was it just strictly radio?
It was strictly radio.
Okay, just a thought. Yeah. Yeah.
So WBLS was, as I said, hugely popular, and many of us thought that BLS stood for Black Liberation Station, even though a guy named Katz owned it.
Yeah, right.
We didn't know that. Then Percy Sutton bought it. Very early on, Percy's group did a survey, and they discovered that about 35% of the station's listenership was not black. They then decided, according to their strange logic, that since the listenership had a significant number of non-blacks, they would stop calling the station black, first of all, and that they would make changes in their programming to accommodate this audience that they had discovered through the survey.
35%. What about the other 65%?
And they began, this is the place where the pitch began to advertisers, that dropped the word black in terms of audience and coined the term urban. In order to get away from this black identification. Yeah. It was an effort to get away from the black budgets of advertisers. The black budgets were, of course, very small, and well, they starved black media.
Yeah, like everything else. Yeah.
Excuse me, of dollars.
Right.
But they thought that by a word change, they could get around that.
Well,
but they didn't just change.
Just change. Yeah, the demographics were changing.
They did. The demographics had always been there. The illogic of that decision to alter the programming as well as the sales pitch of the station was, where did those 35% of non-blacks come from? They had been listening to the station all the time.
Well, they were hip. Maybe they were hip. You're playing some good music.
Obviously, they enjoyed that black experience.
Because why not? That's where the best music's coming.
Exactly.
It's all cover groups of the white.
So actually, when you water down that black experience, you're actually disappointing those white listeners who came there for that
when
black.
You water it down.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And when you open up this amorphous genre called urban, you're now allowing all kinds of other radio outfits peddling other demographics to also come into that.
Because we're all here in New York. In New York City, they got 192 countries in the UN. We got sizable communities, 189 of them in New York City. You could get a lot in under the urban banner.
Now, let me explain why I'm not digressing by bringing,
No, it all hangs together,
that urban up. This urban strategy was quickly adopted by black-owned and by simply black-programmed stations all over the country. And that was the incentive to tone down the news.
What does that mean, tone down? What do you mean, tone down?
To not be so aggressively a news department that serves the black community.
Okay.
You see.
Okay, yeah.
And there's no mystery to it. It just it means that you don't actively seek out the leadership, as I did in Augusta, Georgia, as people were doing all over the country. Seek out the actual leadership of the community and give them a voice. It means that you are not as responsive to the demands of these incipient organizations that are
there could be a lot of economic incentive on that side with the PR firms.
Politically speaking, the news department is ideally a much stronger indicator of who the station is serving than the music, which anybody can play. And so
that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah.
So this movement
you don't
towards
think the music carries a political content inherently?
It can, or it cannot.
It can be just love and June.
But the news tells the story of who you care about.
Right. Okay.
That's what.
And
news
there were a lot of
does.
things to care a lot about.
And so, in packaging these stations as not black but something called urban, the pressures to tone down and then scale down the news became tremendous as well. And so, I would say that the golden age of black radio news was probably around 1973, 74. It's been downhill ever since, and now black radio news on black-oriented stations is almost extinct. And I'll give you an example. By 1973, I'm working in a local station, the #1 rated station in Washington, D.C.
You?
Yeah. There are 3 black-oriented radio stations there. Between those 3 stations, we fielded 21 black radio reporters.
Okay.
That is a press corps of its own.
Sure is.
It had the critical mass to create its own herd.
Now you said when you left Augusta, you went down to Jersey. You came back to Washington. Then you went to Washington.
I went back to
in Washington for a while.
In terms of radio, I went back to Columbus, Georgia, then briefly in Atlanta, then Baltimore, and then by '72. I'm in Washington.
And things were really getting on a hot burn because you were in Augusta only in '70. You were busy.
But that's what you had to do to climb up that rung.
Right. It was also a time of a rend in the society. What was your take on Malcolm at that time?
Well, Malcolm was the first person that I ever cried for.
Yeah.
Just broke down like a child, but I was 15 years old when he was killed.
Yeah.
Malcolm was the iconic black man.
Yeah. A real class act.
Who did not allow himself or black people to be judged by anybody else's imposed standards. Who said, we are the ones who are to judge your behavior. But beyond that, what I think was so singular about Malcolm was that he did not hesitate to do an intra-black critique, that is, to critique so-called black leadership himself. The biggest target of that intra-black critique was what he called the Big Six, and that was the NAACP, the SCLC, the Urban League, basically
what were the other 3 besides those?
Six organizations.
6. You don't remember offhand. Those are some major ones.
NAACP, the Urban League, the SCLC, SNCC.
SNCC also.
Yeah, and there were 2 others, but anyway, they were the big 6. And so Malcolm's critique of the Big Six, which was a running critique, invigorated the black political discourse, because instead of being a kind of flat discourse that is a black camp versus the dangerous and hostile white camp, what Malcolm was injecting so energetically was a black discourse that critiqued our own DC. If there is no internal critique, then leadership becomes stagnant and ultimately collaborative. And
how did you get along with SNCC? Or where did that fit? Because I thought of Stokely as being very radical and very. And how did he get into?
You see, you asked about Malcolm.
Yeah, I know.
The political Malcolm's influence was such in injecting this internal critique that it affected the whole of the black body politic. So that it created room for people like SNCC to feel comfortable being more radical than their godfathers in the SCLC.
Yeah, I guess that's the way it builds.
You see, and so that created a healthier and more vibrant and ultimately more militant community outside of Malcolm and the Nation of Islam.
And you were doing radio stuff in Washington with that group of 23, or you had 21 reporters, and you were in Washington radio, right?
Yeah.
You got into television
my
about
radio
1977?
station, my station had 6 reporters. Another black station had 5, and another one had 10.
You were focusing on Washington then?
Yes.
Yeah, you were Washington.
Well, but Washington is the capital.
Yes,
so
sir.
that gave us national cachet.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
So the national arena was also ours as well, because all of the national organizations, as well as the federal government, but the national organizations were also either, if not headquartered, had a large presence in Washington. So all of the political conversation was open to us.
Problem is, you've had too damned interesting a life. We could talk for hours on all of those things. A couple of things. I heard you say a couple of things early on. You got involved with the Panthers. And then another thing I'm wondering about is, well, let's talk about that, the Panthers. And you got involved with the Panthers in that? And that was another thing that you became involved with. And also, I also saw from your bio you got involved in television around about 1977. We're in television here now as opposed to radio. Maybe those two things might blend one to the other, or how did they develop? Were you out in Oakland, or how did it develop? Or maybe it's not relevant, but you know what I mean.
No, you brought it up, so I'll address it. The New Jersey chapter of the Panther Party was probably, from all that I've been able to gather, probably the worst, least effective chapter in the entire country.
Really?
In the year before I got out of the Army, my brother was in the party, but so were 600 other young men and women from Jersey City. When the Panthers hit Jersey City, they immediately had 600 members, which included all the natural leaders of black youth there. But the party at that time, largely because of COINTELPRO, had entered into a profound split between the Eldridge Cleaver forces and Bobby Seale and Huey Newton.
Hampton?
I said Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, and on the other side, Eldridge Cleaver. And this created a terrible schism and a paranoia in the party. And so the party...
they were being targeted.
That's
physically.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And infiltrated, and with agent provocateurs, and schisms were being artificially created.
COINTELPRO was horrible.
But the end result was that they purged all of Jersey City and left a kind of shell behind sandbags in which only people from Oakland and other parts of the country were, as I said, sandbagged on a hill. And that's how the party looked.
Yeah, and open violence directed against them.
When I got out of the party, that chapter in New Jersey did not speak to the chapter in New York City, which was thought by leadership in Oakland, not to be politically reliable.
Yeah, they're also being targeted physically. I mean, with guns and things.
So in that case, I didn't. My experience in the party is not indicative of other chapters that set down roots. Chicago probably was the best one.
Yeah, we only got about 13 minutes left.
It goes effective, but you wanted to talk about television.
Well, no, I was saying, I think I saw in your bio 1970, and we got to get to Black Agenda Report if you don't mind. Okay, we got to try. You should be less interesting. You should try to tone down. Don't be so interesting because it would be much easier to, you know what I mean? Okay, talk about 77. You got into television?
No.
No. Am I
well,
wrong?
That's when we finally started the television show. But as soon as I got to Washington, you don't have to be a genius to look around the landscape and see what is missing. And so what was clearly missing in black media, or for blacks in media, was the news interview show. The news interview program is a staple of broadcasting.
Absolutely.
On the Sunday show,
Meet the Press,
first of all, decides who is important that week.
Right.
And then proceeds to question that
important person.
And
to give that important take on the human condition.
And typically, especially back then, it's a more complicated environment now. Whatever transpires on those three Sunday news interview programs sets the tone for the news on Monday.
Right.
You see. So these are very important institutions.
Where does it stack up against with the Times and the Post? Washington Post, New York Times, they set an agenda too.
Well, they set an agenda, but on Monday they have all watched the Sunday show.
Okay, right.
And so it's very, very politically important, and yet there was no such black thing.
Yeah, right.
And so as soon as
Gil Noble was trying.
As soon as I could, well, Gil Noble did not make news.
No.
The function of the news interview show is to make news.
Okay.
Otherwise, it has no function at all.
Okay.
And so, as a journalist, as a black journalist, I see clearly that this is what we need. And so I put together the format. That was rather easy. And in a nutshell, it took 3 years to finally get America's Black Forum on the air.
Where? In Washington?
Started off in 12, it was syndicated.
Oh, really?
Started off in 12 cities. So that was the first nationally syndicated black news interview program.
Congratulations.
On commercial
television. And who were
television.
the on-camera people that were there?
Our first guest was Andy Young. And he
And who were the interviewers? Was it you?
Me and two other reporters.
Congratulations. Good for you.
Here's the most important part.
Andy Young.
So our first guest is Andy Young.
Right.
And he says that the British all but invented racism. And of course I dash off the press release and we make international news. Agence France Presse, Reuters, of course AP and UPI, TASS, the Soviet news agency, everywhere. And for the next 13 weeks, we made national and international news, CBS Newsbreak, everything.
But you didn't have a broadcast center somewhere or something? You were syndicating, but where did you produce the programming?
We worked out of the ABC affiliate in Washington.
In Washington, okay.
In Washington.
Right, okay.
But we didn't
Good for you.
But we did not work for them. We worked out of their studios.
You just used their studios and then syndicated.
So we were the first black news entity to consistently make national and international news in every episode, and there has been none ever
I was going to
since.
say, that sounds like a real good beginning. They ought to keep going. We ought to have it now. Where the hell is it now?
Well, for 4 years, that's what we did. And
for 4 years is pretty good, yeah. From what years? What years? 77
from
to 82 or 81?
77 to 81.
Okay, why did it not stay? Well, there would have been a demographic there. It would have been a political thing. Show, really good. Alternative. Why didn't that have legs?
The show only went off the air a couple of years ago. But when me and my partners sold our shares, and we don't have time to explain why, immediately that show stopped making news because the new owners didn't care about making news. And
Clear
so
Channel or something?
No, some black entrepreneurs who
wanted to make some money with music. Is that it? Is there money in news or not?
They ultimately wound up having Pat Buchanan as a guest.
Oh God, I hope you got some humor.
So you can see how bankrupt these people were. But for 4 years, that's what we did. We made news, and also we beat all the in Washington. We beat Meet the Press, Issues and Answers, and Face the Nation in the ratings.
Okay, well, I don't understand. You started
Sunday.
around 77, and you said you went for 4 years, and then you said it only went off the air a few years ago. Now
that's
we're
right.
talking
We sold our
2010.
shares. The show continued, but
but it had been so transformed that it didn't have anything like what it was supposed to be from the original, right? You weren't able to keep it going. You weren't able to keep it going as a viable thing in terms of business.
That's not true.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
It's more complicated than that.
I'm sure everything is.
We decided that we would sell our shares. We had our reasons. As soon as we did that, the new management
was on lookout for Pat Buchanan.
didn't seem to care about making news, although they did continue to do interviews, and many of them, in fact, were entertainment-oriented. But the point was, it did not make news. And if a news interview program does not make news, it's not fulfilling.
Seems to me you wanted to be a thing to help set the agenda. Yeah, that was good. I'm
That's
sorry
right.
it wasn't able to keep continuing under your stewardship. And I don't want to go into the details because it gets too involved and everything like that.
It wouldn't interest your audience.
Oh, well, it would interest me. I wish we had more time.
Well,
We've got to get down and have a beer
it.
sometime and talk about it in depth because that was really good and everything. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, I want to say. But anyway, I wonder now, what about black? Now, we only got about 7 minutes left, 6 minutes left. So what about the Black Agenda Report? How about that? You're the executive producer, is that what you call
Executive editor.
Executive editor, sorry, yes, right.
In 2002, me and a partner, looked at the internet situation, and we saw, for black people, another
opportunity.
Well, you see a wasteland, and there's an opportunity to grow something in it.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Newton Minow.
Exactly. That was a good turn of phrase, and it still applies. So we decided that what was needed for the health of the black polity, was a journal, a weekly political journal that would be of service to what we call influencers. Influencers is a media marketing term. It basically means it's the same kind of people who look at Issues and Answers and Face the Nation and all those.
There's a difference between influence and power.
An influencer is one who influences the opinions, whose opinion influences the opinions of others.
Right.
So masses of people do not watch Face the Nation and Issues and Answers.
Oh, sure.
But the people who advertise on those shows know that movers and shakers do.
They must have that all worked out in the graphics and the algorithms and so forth, understanding where the market is and where the audience and where the power brokers are and all that kind of stuff. I would think people that are in journalism.
They have it worked out to the extent that they can get advertisers to buy it.
Yeah, that's what I guess. I guess they could. Yeah.
That's what works.
Yeah.
And so with the collapse in the 90s of Emerge, a black news weekly, there was nothing for the influencer segment of black people. No focus for discussing the issues of the day. No place where the kind of provocative discussion
Cutting edge,
that is necessary for a healthy polity.
You think there's a couple changes still needed?
So
I'm making a joke. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Humanity has not been perfected.
It isn't perfected yet. You still see a couple of problems, to put it mildly. Yeah.
The promise of the internet, to put it bluntly, is that it's so cheap.
Yeah, right.
That people with almost no funds, but who have energy and some level of talent, can get a real conversation going.
Yeah, right. Well, you can get a thing here like we do it here. It's all financed by the cable industry, so you can make a program. You can make it. The cost is zero.
And that
to
of course.
the producer.
And that of course.
And it's reaching out now because this is going to stream to the internet. It's going to be able to see it on a computer everywhere in the world, and that costs nothing. You can put it on YouTube. That costs nothing.
But remember, of course, that was wrenched from the cable companies as a condition of all of the public funds. That were put into creating the infrastructure
well, yes, but
for
it was
cable.
Also
all those holes in the ground.
There was a guy down in Augusta in 1970 making trouble down there, making a whole thing. There was a rent in the that was you, and it was good. Well, God bless you and everything, bringing that thing. But there was a rent in the society about then, and there was public, there was civil society input, and the cable industry, instead of retaining all earnings, as you would do normally, they agreed and have held up to it that they would set aside about 5% of their revenue for PEG.
Sure.
One of which is public access. And so they set it up and they give real money to set, this is all done by real money, you got equipment, and from the cable industry. And it's called public access, but it's being supported by payments from private sector rather than retaining all their earnings. They do that. They do the same thing for C-SPAN. But that means you can have public distribution, but it's very democratic, and you can have a lot of different kinds of things going on. But anyway, I just throw that out.
So in 2002, we created Black Commentator.
Okay.
In fact, with the same partner that I had created America's Black Forum with back in 1977. And then because of internal personal differences, not because of any political schism. Me and the writing staff split off in 2006 and created Black Agenda Report to continue that same mission.
Good for you. Good to go. It's still ongoing and everything. What's the outreach? What's the standards? What's the dimensions and demographics and that kind of thing? But we only got about a minute or two left.
It reaches the influencers, the movers and shakers.
And what's the distribution channels? How is it on the web, or how is it
on the web? Just go to www.blackagendareport.com, and there is a new issue out every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday, you got that going. Okay, that's good. And is that an hourly thing, or how does that work? I mean,
no. This is the internet equivalent of print.
Okay.
But we also do audio commentaries, 3 of them at least, every week. Those commentaries are also aired, we believe, on around 30 radio stations around the country.
Good for you, good for you. I'm glad there's someplace where the authentic voice of the needed protest is being heard. Yeah.
And in the last month, we've begun Black Agenda Radio, which is through the Progressive Radio Network.
Okay, very good. Pacifica used to be involved with the fellow here and everything like that. Trouble is, it's too interesting. We've run out of time. It's almost going to black, and when we go to black, there's no point talking because it isn't on tape. It doesn't exist. But thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for a very interesting story. Your pleasure to have the perceptions. Couldn't we talk for hours easily? Glen Ford, executive editor, blackagendareport.com, and it's a major source of getting a take on the human condition that's very authentic and cutting edge, and congratulations on all that work, such a well-read life.